they don't need to like get your card and go behind the counter, and then just like process your payment, then bring it back to you for you to sign. That doesn't happen in Brazil.
Hi, welcome to another episode of FI Today, the podcast where we talk about all things banks, credit unions, payments, and more. I have an awesome show lined up for you all today. With me, we have Caroline Cypriano, all the way from Brazil, joining us on the podcast. Caroline, how's it going?
I'm good. How about you today, Kevin?
I'm good. So, before we jump into all things faster payments, including Pix, which I know is the faster payment rail in Brazil, why don't you just give the listeners a little bit of background on yourself and how you got to starting JJ4Tech here in the U.S.?
Awesome. Well, so a little bit of JJ4Tech. Basically, the other co-founders, they are also the founders of a company in Brazil called JD Consultants. I'll translate to make it easier, but the name of the company is JD Consultores, então JD Consultores. That's how you say it in Portuguese. But so this company is the leading service provider in Brazil for Pix. So basically in Brazil, JD Consultants facilitates the integration between financial institutions and the Pix service. And considering all that knowledge and experience in Brazil, my partners, they saw the opportunity with the launch of the FedNow service in the US to bring all the tech to the US and contribute with this new payments revolution in the US, let's say. Basically, at first, like, we ran a gap analysis, right, to compare the software in Brazil and the software in the US, and we got to the conclusion that actually both use the same standards. So ISO 20022, and that's how it all started. And where I came from, right? Where did I come from place? Basically, I used to work for financial market infrastructure in Brazil, basically authorized by the Brazilian Central Bank under the category of collateral registry, focused on card receivables. And I know that sounds like pretty complex, but basically I used to be a director in that company, and JD Consultants used to be a supplier for the group that I used to work for.
I see.
So that's how we all like met, and I ended up being invited to join the team and basically found JJ4Tech in the US. So since it's a complete different company and it's headquartered in the US and focused in the American market, I joined to basically start that mission of starting a new company. So that's how it all started, and that's how we ended up here.
Nice. And you mentioned Pix. So for those listening, what is Pix? And it's PIX, correct? Not PICK, it's PIX.
Yes, perfect. So it's Pix, and Pix is basically the instant payment service existing in Brazil and operated by the Brazilian Central Bank. So yes, Pix is written PIX, and actually, just a curiosity about the word, that's not a word in Portuguese, and it's important to say Portuguese because I know that a lot of people think that people speak Spanish in Brazil, but they don't. Like, so and actually Pix, it isn't a word in Portuguese. So it's basically, and it's not even like the shortening for another word. It's basically
identity is nothing either. We made it up. Just literally nothing. So I get it.
So Pix was made up by the central bank. So they created this brand, and it was created basically to represent technology. So it was inspired by the word pixels, and also the logo for Pix looks like a transaction. So it was basically a concept created for people like easily and effectively and unforgettably know that it's the instant payment service in Brazil. It also, like, so it was launched in November 16, 2020. And financial institutions were really involved in the process of creating it, even though it was mandated by the
Mm,
central bank. So that's
mm,
also an
mm,
interesting part about PIX. So
mhm.
in general, that's what PIX is.
Well, Pix was born the same day as my daughter on November 16th. I just
Oh
found that out.
wow.
So I will always remember that now. She was in 2019, but
Yes.
Pix is 2020. But it's a good day. And
Interesting.
also
Good take.
with Pix, so if I'm hearing this correctly, the parent company then, or the not the parent company, the related company for JJ4Tech is JD Consultants, right? I probably butchered that. JD Consultants,
A little bit,
and
but okay.
they are they are the main provider of services connecting organizations to the Pix network.
Yes. Perfect.
Well, so basically, you have tons of experiences connecting organizations to faster payment networks in Brazil.
Yep. That's what we do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And now, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself here, is that similar to what JJ for Tech is doing then in the US in terms of making it simple for organizations to connect to, in theory, like the FedNow network?
Exactly. So what we've noticed also in the American market is that it's really hard, for small and medium-sized financial institutions. And they're like, I'm gonna add here like credit unions, community banks, like
Mm-hmm.
all financial institutions. Um, uh, the small and medium-sized don't really have a lot of development resources in-house. So a lot of banks don't really have, like the devs sitting there and waiting for the new project, if they have devs, it's just to maintain what they already have. But what they
Mm-hmm.
usually do is just outsource everything, even like
Mm-hmm.
their core processing systems, right? So we know that these institutions to basically evolve, innovate, and make sure that they're not gonna lose new clients, right? They're not gonna not only lose real like new clients, but also lose the ones they have, right, for competition,
Mm-hmm.
considering that other banks are implementing new solutions. They need help. So, in the end of the day, we are the ones that help those institutions integrate to the FedNow service. So,
Mm-hmm.
there are two layers there, right? The connection to the FedNow service, and also basically being able to provide the main features related to the FedNow service, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you just hit it on the head in terms of losing to competition. I talked to you about this at a conference earlier. Was it this year? Yeah, earlier this year. Time has just been flying by, but
Yeah,
where we
crazy.
talked
We're
to
almost
companies.
ending 2023.
I know it's crazy. But yeah, we'll
Crazy.
talk to FIs, and they might not be interested in implementing RTP or Fed now, but think about the scenario where, let's say I'm a gig economy worker and I want to get paid out at the end of a shift, but I can't do it because my bank or credit union doesn't have it. But if I sign up with an account for, with Wells Fargo or Chase, I can get it. And maybe as a customer, I only move that one little account over. But next thing you know, I say, hey, the online service, the platform is easier at the other bank. And then loans are, it's a way in, and really a lot of these smaller FIs, for me, it's table stakes, but they need to create like the technologies so that their customers don't go looking at other providers for that same technology. A lot of it, especially with faster payments, they should really be looking at that right now.
Exactly, exactly. Especially when we look at like new generation of consumers, everyone wants to pay like over the phone. Everyone like you can pay through your Apple Watch, you can pay through your phone. New consumers want that. They want innovation. They want to spend less money on what isn't the essential, right? Payment is just a mean used to
Mm-hmm.
reach a final objective. The less time you spend on that is will probably also increase your willingness to do it more and more, right? If it's really hard to pay for something, or just sometimes you're just gonna give up, right? If you're trying to buy
Yeah.
for trying to buy something online and the website keeps on crashing, like yeah, sometimes you're just gonna give up. I
Well,
didn't
and
even want to
that's
purchase that
that's so funny you
anyways.
brought that up. It's like my wife was on a site the other day, and she's like, "What the heck? This site? They don't take Apple Pay? I'm just screw this. I'm just gonna go to Amazon."
Yes.
It's like,
Yes, that's it. But actually, means of payment, they increase conversion. And that's why e-commerces or
Yeah.
stores, they want other means of payment because they want to make sure that the consumer, as soon as they're right in front of them, they're going to convert. So they need to
Oh
offer
yeah.
like all the easiest options for them to convert. So in the end of the day, the store wants to have access to service providers, right, to payment providers that will give them the most options possible. And that's
Well,
when it comes to banking services, right?
oh, and 100%, and this gets lost sometimes on the banks. You think about all these large retailers, the placement of each individual item at the store, whether it's near the cash register, right when you walk in towards that's all been, really analyzed, and the placement is picked out by an expert to maximize revenue at that store. And sometimes I feel like payments is almost overlooked, where, to your point, by just streamlining the checkout experience, if it can lead to greater conversions, a lot of companies really look at it because they know how important it is. But a lot of other smaller organizations might just say, hey, I'll just go with whatever to accept credit card. But really it's vital to increase conversion, and that leads to real revenue.
Exactly, exactly. Like that's really a deal breaker, and that's
Yeah.
where banks really they got to keep their eyes on because if they don't offer those services, their competitor will. And
Yeah.
the earliest you adopt that, the earlier you are in this competition race, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, and for you too, because you've been seeing it now. The Pix network's been live for a number of years at this point. So, talk to me in terms of like what's going on down there. Is it widely adopted? Is it like super easy to use? I think you said the government mandated it, so I'm assuming it's widely adopted now. But maybe not. Like, I guess, yeah. How are things going?
Yeah, but so an important, really important part is um, the central bank mandated it for financial institutions to adopt it. Like financial institutions and some non-bank institutions, basically if they hold at least like 500,000 accounts.
Hmm.
But which was also really interesting because in the end of the day, the central bank wanted um the system to be the most inclusive possible. So that's really interesting because you not only have financial institutions there, but they did not mandate the businesses, right, or the people to actually use it. So actually, at first, when Pix started, I was one of the people that would say that I thought it wasn't going to be highly adopted. I thought it was going to be too hard to use. Like lots of people like didn't really have a smartphone. That's what I thought,
Hmm.
but I was wrong. So
Hmm.
in the end of the day, when we look at the stats now on Pix, it's just insane. So there are a lot of reasons why I'd say that Pix is a really successful instant payment case. So like I'd say that the first reason is because Pix is the fastest growing instant payment service in the world, according to the Bank of International Settlements. And also another really impressive data point here is that Pix made Brazil the second country in the world rank of highest number of instant payment transactions in 2022. So only
Hmm.
behind India. And
Wow.
also, Pix changed the game when it comes to financial inclusion. So 49 million people started doing electronic transfers after Pix was created. So mainly, like that happened mainly in the north of the country. So that's one of the less densely populated areas in the country.
Hmm.
And like currently, like in Brazil, about like 96 of Brazilian like commercial establishments, sorry, accept Pix.
Oh
So
wow. Okay.
96%. That's really impressive.
So
Um,
what are the biggest use cases then driving all that?
oh, that's a great question actually. So I'd say that the first main use case is kind of like obvious because it's P2P.
Hmm.
When we look at basically like numbers of use cases, like 60% of Pix transactions are P2P, and then
Hmm.
30% is person to business.
Hmm.
But when we look at like sums of money, like financial volumes, then that number changes. Actually, P2P and P2B are almost tied. That means that usually Pix transactions used for P2P are for lower sums of
Smaller dollar
money,
amounts.
right? Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but I'm saying that P2P is kind of obvious because in Brazil you don't have a widespread service like Venmo, for example, like in the US.
Mm.
So Pix really came changing totally like behavior, of the population. There were like a few tools, like a tool called PicPay, but it was a closed loop tool, really, really good, but not like highly adopted. So Pix was a really big change because it was ubiquitous. So since all banks like were in it, there was kind of like no way out. And it also, and you could use an account that wasn't a bank account. So that made it pretty widespread. And there's so many use cases. Like Pix is used like literally everywhere in Brazil, not only like for transfers, like transferring money to a friend, but also you can like pay for public transportation. You can pay for food at restaurants. You can pay for gas in gas station. Pay for e-commerce purchases. Pay for invoices. So I could go on and on. Like on
Mm.
all the use cases. Basically used for like everything. And
Everything.
yeah, and it's really interesting because you can also use QR codes. Like it generates QR codes. You use QR codes to pay Pix and to receive Pix. And you also see the QR codes on POS machines. So
Oh,
you can
cool.
just like scan a QR code on a POS and pay for a bill. So there are some use cases that are also really different and that I really like a lot, like withdrawing cash. You can withdraw cash at a store without purchasing something. So you're not going to get cash back. You're going to just like go there and withdraw cash through Pix. So that's also really interesting.
Hmm.
And
How does that work? You're on the app. You choose to withdraw cash through Pix. You show the QR code to the cashier or something, and then the
yeah,
like.
you read it. And also like there are different types of QR codes, right? There's dynamic QR code and there's static QR code. So the
Mhm.
static QR code, you can like basically configure like about like four data, but like the minimum requirement is just having the key of the receiver. So you just read the QR code and you just fill out who's going to receive the money. And then there's also the dynamic QR code that actually like is for like one-time payment use. So it has
Mhm.
all the detail of that payment to be done. So there are a lot of different solutions that Pix provides. And also like when Pix was released, it didn't have all those features, it was like released in stages, which is also a really interesting point to compare also to the FedNow service because the central the Fed is doing the same thing, right? They're releasing the FedNow service in stages, right? So releasing
Yep.
features now, but promising new features in the future. So that's really interesting. And also, there are a lot of future use cases that the Brazilian Central Bank is also planning to like widen its use. So there's a plan for like an automatic Pix for utility payment,
Oh, cool.
yeah, and or Pix International for cross-border payments. That's also really interesting.
Well, that's
Um,
like a whole nother animal. Once
yeah.
cross border with faster payments, it's
It's crazy, crazy, crazy.
yeah,
But it's
yeah,
on the
yeah, yeah,
pipeline.
yeah. So
And
then I guess
yeah.
then from your standpoint, then you were a non-believer. You were proven wrong. Pix really has this. So let's say that you're out in Brazil right now. Is it It's like if let's say you go out to dinner with your friends and you're all paying for dinner. Is everyone pretty much pay by Pix to everyone like splitting the bill and to the restaurant? It's like normal.
It's really normal. Like
Yeah.
it happens a lot. And it's really interesting also. Another curiosity here, but like culture curiosity. In Brazil, it's when you go to a restaurant, it would be rude for waiter to just leave the check at your table. Like you
Oh,
have to order the check. It does like that so that's actually some like one thing that I got a little bit shocked the first time that like I realized that difference, and also
you
another.
thought the waiter was like kicking you out when you came to visit the U.S.
Yes, I did. I was like, whoa, this is kind of weird. Are they closing
Yeah.
or something?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then also another curiosity, but more on the payment side, is It's really common when you pay for a bill at at a restaurant, the restaurant using a mobile POS. So
Mm-hmm.
the waiter will get the POS and he'll go to your table and then he'll scan your card if you want to pay through card, or you'll scan the QR code on the screen to pay through Pix. So
Okay.
they don't need to like get your card and go behind the counter, and then just like process your payment, then bring it back to you for you to sign. That doesn't happen in Brazil. Also, like no signing paper happens. Like all
Mm.
the payments are tapping or through or using the pin, right? So when
Yeah.
it comes to cards, so just like
So it sounds like
side
then,
curiosity.
in your opinion, only a matter of time probably before the faster payments kind of take over and become the norm. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yes, no doubt. Like we can't
Mm.
ignore the differences between the US and Brazil. Like of course, like we're talking about a country culturally different as we just mentioned, right? And not only culturally different, but also when it comes to governance, right? We had a system that was mandated by um the central bank. So it made, of course, adoption a lot faster than
Yeah.
you're probably going to see in the US. So probably
Yep.
adoption will be a lot slower. And when we talk about also the American market, we're talking about a market, let's say, 40 times bigger when we're going to compare the number of depository institutions, for example. So we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about a different market. But the fact is, innovation is coming. So it's going to be
Yep.
slower, but it will happen. And for the reasons
Yep.
we just mentioned, competition is coming, changes are coming, and consumers are demanding different payment
Yep.
forms.
Yep. Well, and I guess with that though, right? So we know that FI should be looking at faster payments, right? RTP Fed now. Um, you've also implemented thousands of companies, if not, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands in Brazil. What are the challenges that you've seen as, FIs in Brazil or even organizations, right? When they've tried to implement PICs, what challenges are occurring, and what challenges do you think will carry over to the U.S. as well?
Okay, so and to give a little bit of like stats here, so JD Consultants has more than 300 banks as clients. Again, we're talking
Wow.
about a market in Brazil that is a lot smaller, right, than the American market when it comes to number of financial institutions. But we process more than 1 billion transactions a month.
Yeah, on
So that
PICs.
yeah, on Pix.
Yep. Yep.
So we're talking about like a huge volume of transactions month. And so about challenges that financial institutions. So there were a few, right? Especially when it comes to um balancing all the projects that the central bank mandated, because the central
Mm.
bank had a huge agenda of innovations, and they all were mandated over the financial institutions, and they all had to implement at the same time. And actually, as I mentioned, that I used to work for a collateral registry, right? So at the same time, the mandatory registration of all card receivables in Brazil was happening as PIX was being implemented. So that's just
Mm.
an example of huge projects that were mandated by the central bank at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, and also, like, of course, huge banks have a lot of like what they're pretty worried about security, right? About
Mm.
making sure there's not going to be instability, there's not going to be fraud. So all that you have to take into consideration when you implement a new solution, right? And you have legacy systems, so it's not easy to implement
No.
that in
Yeah.
existing systems. But actually, that's true for any innovation. Whatever you're going to
Mm-hmm.
add on to your core system, you're going to struggle with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that problem is something that will be encountered by financial institutions in the US. And that's
Mm-hmm.
also why I believe that third party service providers will also help a lot, because they're solutions that are plug and play, let's say. Of course, like we're talking about it, it's not that easy because we're talking about a new system, right? And we
Yeah.
gotta like develop new integrations. It's
No,
all
but still, it's
new.
like you think about, if I'm a bank, if I want to connect to the FedNow network, I can either dedicate some resources who are more generalists and try to figure it out and waste a lot of money and effort. And even after then, I don't know if
Yes.
it's going to work, or use a third party who has done this thousands of times, and I'm confident it'll work. You know what I mean? So it's a trade-off of time and money, but
Yes,
I
totally.
totally
It's
get
time
that.
and money because or else you would have to draw that project from scratch, like study it all,
Yep.
hire developers, develop that, implement tests. Why are you gonna do all that if you can just like use a solution that already exists, you
Yep.
know? So I would say that was the major challenge, like found by financial institutions. Of course, also like the whole drawing of pits was a big
Mm-hmm.
challenge. Like
Mm-hmm.
JD consultants that were also like in the work group in the central bank work groups to discuss the rules. So of course, like all the new rules on the system, how
Yeah.
you're gonna get that going, like with like in the existing payment market, and also there are other like crazy challenges that you kind of like can't really foresee before it happens. For example, a really big deal was an increase in kidnapping after Pix was released.
Oh no.
And so actually, like for example, São Paulo reached stats of like the highest number of kidnapping in 15 years.
Mm.
And so what the central bank did is they created um uh a rule like limiting basically with a limit on daily transactions that can be set by the user, so you can establish like the limit. So okay, so I want to limit my day transfer to 1,000, my night transfer to 1,000 also, but okay, now I want to change it to 10,000. You can, but it will take from 24 to 48 hours for it to be processed.
Oh,
That's on purpose.
so the kidnappers could only take whatever the limit was. Is that what you're
Yep.
saying?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So in the end of the day, like that person will only get like your day limit, which is 1,000.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like those mechanisms, they were created after implementing pigs, because then
Yeah.
you started like these problems couldn't be like foreseen. Like, oh, I think like
Yeah,
that's
yeah, it's hard. It's hard to see all that for
yeah.
sure. It's but it does
Totally.
sound. I do also agree with you where the implementation of a faster payment rail is always challenging for these FIs, and if you could do it yourself, and there are benefits and negatives to doing it yourself, but if it were up to me, using a third party who focuses on this is definitely a better use of money and time. So
Yeah.
I think I could definitely see the appeal there. So as we kind of wrap up, Caroline, what's the best way, if someone has a question for you or wants to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do so?
You can email me, and my email is caroline.cypriano, so CYPRIANO at JJ4Tech.com. But probably Kevin will also send out my email, but feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'll be
Okay.
glad to help.
Awesome. Well, hey, Caroline, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. We really appreciate it. And for those listening at home, we'll see you on the next one.